The first thing Miriam Vale saw when she reached Copper Hollow was a sign nailed to her orchard gate. Not the house, not the hills, not the long rows of trees her late husband had described in letters as if they were a congregation waiting for spring. The sign came first. Whiteboard, black paint, clean letters, too clean for a place where dust settled on everything by noon. Dead orchard for sale. Inquire at Mercer Land Office. Miriam sat very still in the wagon while the driver shifted beside her and tried to decide whether silence or apology would cost him less. The orchard beyond the gate did look dead. There was no kindness in pretending otherwise. The branches were gray and crooked. The grass between the rows had gone yellow. A broken ladder leaned against the first tree like a man who had given up halfway through a chore. The farmhouse at the far end wore its dust in the windows, and the porch rail sagged where nobody had rested a hand in months. Her husband, Daniel, had left her this place. He had also left debt, unanswered letters, and a town that had apparently begun selling her inheritance before she arrived to see it. "You want me to take you on to the hotel?" the driver asked. Miriam stepped down from the wagon. "No." "Ma'am, this road gets dark early." "Then I will learn its shape before dark." He helped unload her trunk, 2 crates of books, a sewing basket, and a small wooden case wrapped in oilcloth. He looked at that last case with curiosity. "That's delicate," Miriam said. "Medicine?" "Grafting knives." The driver stopped asking questions. After he left, Miriam stood alone before the gate and untied the sign. She did not tear it down. She did not break it over her knee, though for one brief and satisfying moment she imagined doing exactly that. Instead, she carried it to the porch and laid it face down beside the steps. Daniel used to say an orchard told the truth slowly. Miriam had loved him for sentences like that when they were young. Later, when he left Missouri for Colorado to make a place ready before sending for her, those same sentences began to feel like excuses tied with ribbon. Then his letters thinned. Then they stopped. Then came the notice from a lawyer saying fever had taken him in February, and the property passed to her. Now she was standing in the place he had promised would be theirs, and someone had already named it dead. She unlocked the farmhouse with a key that stuck in the door. Inside, dust lay over everything. A cup remained on the table. A man's coat hung from a peg by the stove. On the mantel stood a jar filled with curled paper tags, each tied with brown string. Miriam lifted one carefully. Mission Pear, West Row, 5th Tree. Another read, Winter Apple from San Miguel Cutting. Another, Bell Plum, graft took after second attempt. Her throat closed. Daniel had not merely planted trees. He had kept records. Poor records, judging by the piles, but records all the same. By sunset, Miriam had found his orchard book under the bed wrapped in a flour sack. She sat at the kitchen table with a lamp, reading until her eyes ached. Dates, weather, cuttings traded, failures, late frost, bark split, roots sound. Wait one more year. The phrase appeared 4 times. Wait one more year. The first knock came after dark. Miriam opened the door with the lamp in one hand and Daniel's orchard book under the other. A man stood on the porch step holding his hat. He was tall, with gray beginning at his temples and soil on his cuffs. Not town soil either. Real soil. Darker, heavier. The kind that clung because it had been handled. "Mrs. Vale?" "Yes?" "Thomas Calder. I own the small place east of the creek." She knew the name. Daniel had mentioned Tom Calder in letters. Quiet man, knows trees, doesn't trust quick answers. "Mr. Calder," she said. He glanced toward the orchard, though the rows were only shadows now. "I saw the stage come through." "So did the land office, apparently." The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile. "You found the sign." "It found me." "Mercer had no right to post it." "Then he is confident." "He's been confident for years." Miriam stepped back. "Would you like coffee?" He looked surprised. So did she. She had not meant to invite him in, but if a man came at night to speak plainly, coffee was cheaper than guessing. Thomas entered carefully, as if the house still belonged to someone whose absence deserved respect. That was the first thing Miriam noticed. He did not look around like a buyer. At the table, he refused sugar, accepted coffee, and said what nobody else had yet bothered to say. Daniel believed the orchard was not dead. Miriam tightened her hands around her cup. "Do you?" "I believe he knew more about those trees than Mercer wanted people to hear." "That is not the same answer." "No." She waited. Thomas looked at the orchard book. "May I?" Miriam slid it across the table. He read several entries slowly. His thumb paused on the phrase she had noticed. "Wait one more year." "He wrote this after the freeze," Thomas said. "What freeze?" "Late April, 2 years back. Warm spell woke half the valley early. Then frost came down hard. Folks cut trees back too soon because the branches looked gone. Daniel wouldn't. Said the rootstock might still be living." "And was it?" "On some." "Which ones?" "The ones Mercer wants." There it was, the first proper question in the room. Miriam leaned forward. Why would a land agent want dead trees? Thomas closed the book. Maybe he doesn't think they're dead. The next morning, Copper Hollow introduced itself through glances. Miriam walked to town in a black dress too warm for the weather and boots already powdered with road dust. The street was one block of false fronts, hitching rails, canvas awnings, and people with the particular talent of looking without appearing to look. A woman sweeping outside the bakery paused mid-stroke. 2 men outside the feed store stopped talking until Miriam passed, then resumed too softly. At the Mercer Land Office, the window sign read, "Property transfers, water claims, agricultural assessment." Miriam entered without knocking. Silas Mercer stood behind a desk polished beyond local need. He was a round man with pale eyes and a voice that tried to sound like sympathy even before he knew what had happened. "Mrs. Vale," he said, "welcome to Copper Hollow. I had hoped to call on you this morning." "You already called on my gate." His expression did not change. "Ah, the sign. A practical measure, nothing more. Your husband's creditors are anxious, and the property has not been tended." "It has been named." "Accurately, I fear." Miriam placed the sign face up on his desk. "Who gave permission?" "Mrs. Vale, I understand this is difficult." "I asked who gave permission." Mercer folded his hands. "Your husband owed on water shares, equipment repair, and transport costs. If the orchard cannot produce, the sale is inevitable. I was attempting to spare you the strain of managing inquiries." "How kind." He allowed himself a small sigh. "Sentiment is expensive in orchard country." "So is haste." Mercer opened a drawer and removed a folder. "I have a buyer prepared to assume all debt and provide you a settlement. You could return east before the week is out." "Who is the buyer?" "The fruit concern from Pueblo." "Name?" "They prefer discretion until terms are settled." "Then terms are not settled." His smile thinned. You are entitled to inspect the property, of course. But I should warn you, offers decline once buyers understand a widow intends to experiment. Miriam picked up the sign. Good, she said. Then the first buyer I lose will be the one who wanted me ignorant. Outside, Thomas Calder was standing near the watering trough, pretending to examine a harness strap on his horse. Do men in Copper Hollow often wait outside offices by accident? Miriam asked. Only when the harness demands it. Is the harness well? Recovering. She wanted to be annoyed. Instead, she almost laughed, and that annoyed her more. Thomas nodded toward the road. If you mean to inspect the orchard, do it before the heat. I mean to inspect it alone. You should. That answer stopped her. He added, I'll be in my own rows, if you need a ladder that won't break under you. Then he mounted and rode east. Miriam spent the rest of the day among the trees. At first, she saw only ruin, dry twigs, split bark, fallen fruit from some past season shriveled beneath leaves. But Daniel had taught her more than he realized during their early married years, when they tended 3 apple trees behind the Missouri house and argued over pruning cuts like scholars over scripture. Dead wood snapped cleanly. Living wood bent before breaking. She cut a narrow sliver from a branch on the 5th west row pair. Under the gray bark, a line of green showed faint as a secret. Miriam stood very still. The tree was not dead, not healthy, not safe, but not dead. She checked another, then another. Some were gone, no question, but scattered through the rows, especially along the old stone-lined irrigation trace, the cambium held green, weak green, stubborn green. By sunset, she had marked 12 trees with strips of cloth. Thomas appeared at the gate carrying a ladder over one shoulder. I didn't ask, she said. I know. This one's safer. She looked at the ladder, then at the broken one near the first tree. You expect me to thank you? No. Good. He set the ladder beside the porch. How many? She almost pretended not to understand. 12, maybe 15. That's more than Daniel found last fall. You knew? He showed me 7. And you told no one? He asked me not to. Said Mercer was circling. Miriam looked across the rows. Anger rose in her, not at Thomas, not entirely at Daniel, but at the months she had been away while decisions gathered like weeds. He should have sent for me. Yes. Thomas said it plainly. No defense, no smoothing, no tidy explanation for a man who could no longer explain himself. Miriam looked at him then, and some small part of her unclenched. I have 3 days before Mercer presses the creditors. Then tomorrow, we find out whether those 12 are enough. We? He looked toward the orchard. If you allow it. Why would you help? Because Daniel helped me keep my east rows through the freeze. Debt, then? Partly. And the other part? Thomas picked up his hat from the porch rail. I don't like watching good roots called dead by men who never dug around them. The next morning, Miriam found him at the gate with pruning saws, grafting wax, clean cloth, and a woman named Elena Soria, who had run the mission garden before marrying the baker in town. Elena was small, direct, and looked at Miriam's orchard with the expression of a doctor who had arrived too late, but not uselessly so. Daniel traded cuttings with my uncle, Elena said. He was trying to bring back the old pears. Old pears? San Miguel winter pears. They travel well, keep long, and make buyers behave themselves because they cannot get them anywhere else. Miriam looked at the gray rows. These? If they live. There was the second question. If they live, the orchard is rare. If they die, Mercer is right. If Mercer knows they might live, his kindness has teeth. They worked until noon. Elena tested graft unions. Thomas cut away dead limbs with careful hands. Miriam cleaned wounds, sealed cuts, and compared tree tags against Daniel's book. The labor steadied her. Each tree became less a symbol of loss and more a problem with bark, sap, rot, root, and possibility. Near the old irrigation trace, Elena stopped by a twisted pear whose trunk split into 2 leaders. "This one is mislabeled," she said. Miriam checked the tag. "Mission pear, west row, 5th tree." "No, this is not mission pear." Thomas came closer. Elena cut a sliver from a bud scar and held it up. "This is bellflower apple on pear root." "Can that live?" Miriam asked. "If the grafter was stubborn?" Thomas gave a quiet breath that might have been a laugh. "Daniel was qualified." Elena studied the tree longer. He was not planting an orchard. He was building a mother block. Miriam looked from one to the other. "What does that mean?" "Cutting stock," Elena said. "Rare varieties grafted onto hardy roots. If these trees survive, each can start dozens more." The orchard shifted under Miriam's eyes. It was still dry, still damaged, still wrapped in debt, but it was not merely land. It was a library with roots. At 2 o'clock, Silas Mercer arrived in a buggy. He stepped down at the gate and surveyed the 3 of them with the expression of a man finding strangers in what he had already begun to own. "This is Vale," he called. "I see you have gathered advisors." Miriam wiped her knife clean before answering. "I have gathered people who know trees." "Then they will tell you what mercy demands. Cut your losses." Elena turned to him. "Trees are not cards, Mr. Mercer." "No, they are worse. Cards do not require water." Thomas descended from the ladder. "What do you want?" Mercer's eyes flicked to him. "To prevent Mrs. Vale from being misled by neighbors with interests of their own." "My interest is saving my orchard," Miriam said. "Your orchard," Mercer repeated gently. "Forgive me, I mean no offense, but you arrived yesterday." The words were soft. The meaning was not. "You are new. You are grieving. You do not belong enough to decide." Miriam felt the sting and almost stepped back from it. Then she remembered the green line under the bark. "I arrived yesterday," she said. "The deed arrived before me." Elena smiled into her sleeve. Mercer opened his folder. "I will make this plain. If the debt is not satisfied by Friday, creditors will seek action. If you sign today, the buyer will pay $70 above debt. And if I wait, the offer may vanish. Then I will enjoy the air it leaves behind." Mercer looked at the marked trees, and for one careless instant, his eyes narrowed at the cloth strips. Miriam saw it. So did Thomas. Mercer knew where to look. After he left, Thomas said, "He has been in this orchard." "Yes." Elena touched one of the cloth strips. "Or someone told him." That night, Miriam searched Daniel's papers again. This time she was not looking for grief. She was looking for motive. She found it in a letter tucked behind a loose drawer panel. "Daniel, if your San Miguel pears live through another season, I can place cuttings with 3 growers at fair rates. Do not sell to Mercer. He asked too many questions about exclusive rights and not enough about the trees. E. Soria." Miriam read it twice, then carried it to Elena before sunrise. Elena swore under her breath in Spanish, apologized to the room, then swore again, more quietly. "He kept this? Behind a drawer. Then he was afraid someone would search the desk. Would Mercer? Mercer searches everything with a smile first." The next question arrived before breakfast. If Daniel knew the orchard had rare value, Why was he so deep in debt? The ledgers showed equipment charges, water fees, freight liens, and repair notes. Some were ordinary, others felt swollen. Miriam could not yet prove why. The proof came from a pump receipt. Thomas found it while helping clear the shed. Mercer had arranged repair of the small wind pump near the upper cistern 3 times in 1 year. The receipt charged for a brass impeller, new leather cups, and transport from Denver. The pump itself held none of those parts. Miriam sat on an overturned crate with the receipt in one hand and the pump housing in the other. Could Daniel have removed them? Thomas shook his head. No reason. Elena leaned against the shed doorway. Could Mercer have charged for repairs never made? That would make the debt false, Miriam said. Part of it. Part of it was enough. They spent the next day gathering receipts. The blacksmith confirmed he had not supplied half the iron billed under his name. The freight clerk remembered only 1 shipment where Mercer had charged 3. The watermaster admitted that Daniel had paid cash twice when his account showed unpaid balances. By Thursday evening, Miriam had a stack of statements: Daniel's orchard book, Elena's letter, and 15 marked living trees. She also had a problem. The creditors' meeting was Friday at noon, but the orchard needed more than proof. It needed time. Trees did not respond to arguments in offices. They responded to seasons. If she could not show immediate value, Mercer would call every statement sentimental confusion and continue pressing for sale. The answer came from the bellflower apple graft. At dawn, Elena arrived carrying a small basket and wearing the fierce look of a woman who had decided sleep was for people with fewer opinions. Show me Daniel's stored cuttings, she said. Stored where? If he was building a mother block, he kept cuttings. Men who label jars do not throw away scion wood. They searched the cellar and found a crate packed in damp sawdust, wrapped in oilcloth and nearly hidden beneath empty jars. Inside were bundles of dormant scions, labeled in Daniel's hand. San Miguel winter pear, bellflower apple, red mission plum. Elena lifted one and tested it with her thumbnail. Still alive. Miriam stared at the crate. Can we sell them? Not sell. Demonstrate. By 9 o'clock, Thomas had hitched the wagon. By 10, they had the crate, the orchard book, and living samples. By 11, they were in town. Mercer had expected a tired widow with papers. Miriam brought an orchard. The creditors gathered in the meeting room above the mercantile. The bank clerk, the watermaster, the freight agent, 2 equipment men. Mercer at the end of the table, hands folded, face composed. Thomas stood near the door. Elena stood beside Miriam because she refused to sit when truth was standing. Miriam began with the debt. She did not accuse what she could not prove. She read the receipts, matched them to statements, named the repairs not made, the freight not delivered, the payments not credited. Each item was small enough to dismiss alone. Together they made a pattern with Mercer's name on it. The bank clerk grew pale. The blacksmith, invited as witness, confirmed his statement. The watermaster confirmed his. Mercer said, "Confusion in accounts is regrettable, but it does not change the orchard's condition." That was the sentence Miriam had been waiting for. She opened the crate. Elena stepped forward and held up the first bundle. San Miguel winter pear, viable cutting stock, rare in this valley. I will buy half the first-tier cuttings at a fair rate and contract for grafting next spring. The room changed. Not much. A chair creaked. The bank clerk leaned forward. The freight agent stopped pretending disinterest. Miriam opened Daniel's book to the marked rows. 15 trees show living cambium. 7 are confirmed rare grafts. These cuttings were stored correctly and remain viable. The orchard is not ready for harvest. It is ready for recovery. Mercer gave a small laugh. Recovery takes money. Yes, Miriam said, which is why false debt matters. Thomas placed the pump receipt on the table, and why men who inflate it should not profit from the sale it creates. Mercer's face hardened. You are out of line. Miriam looked at him. No, I am finally in the row Daniel planted. Nobody clapped. Real rooms rarely do when money is embarrassed. But the bank clerk requested a recess. The watermaster asked to review records. The equipment men began studying Mercer's invoices with sudden interest. By afternoon, the sale was postponed. By evening, 3 charges were struck from the debt. By the following Monday, Mercer had resigned as agent for the creditors, though he called it a temporary withdrawal from public business. Copper Hollow understood the phrase well enough. Miriam kept the orchard. Keeping was not the same as saving. That was the harder part, and it began after the drama ended. Mercer had left one more difficulty behind. The upper cistern was nearly dry. Daniel's notes mentioned a spring box above the orchard, an old stone-lined catchment that fed the shallow irrigation trace during wet months. Miriam had assumed it was another hope entered in ink. Thomas had assumed it failed years ago. Elena did not assume at all. She tied up her sleeves, took Daniel's book, and walked uphill until both of them followed from shame as much as curiosity. The spring box sat under scrub oak and fallen rock, half buried, its cover cracked. Water seeped there, not enough to cheer anyone who wanted a miracle, but enough to darken the soil and feed a trickle beneath leaves. Elena crouched and cleared moss from the stone lip. This was not abandoned. It was blocked. Thomas removed a flat piece of shale wedged inside the outlet. Behind it, mud and roots had packed tight. Miriam knelt beside them. Could weather do that? Weather could begin it, Thomas said. Hands finished it. Mercer again, perhaps, or one of his men, or Daniel himself in some failed attempt at repair. The truth did not step forward meekly. But the effect was plain. Less water reaching the trees, more evidence that the orchard was failing, more pressure to sell. For 2 days, they cleaned the spring box. The work was muddy, slow, and undramatic. Miriam ruined a skirt. Thomas cut his knuckles on stone and said nothing until Elena poured water over his hand and scolded both of them for pretending silence was useful. They reset the cover, cleared the outlet, and opened the trace, one narrow section at a time. On the 3rd morning, a thin line of water reached the first living pear. Miriam stood watching it sink into the soil. It was not enough to save the orchard by itself, but it was enough to change the question from whether the land could live to whether she had the patience to help it. Thomas stood beside her, mud on his boots and sun on his hat brim. Daniel should have written more clearly, she said. Yes. I should have come sooner. Maybe. She looked at him sharply. He did not retreat. I don't know the shape of your marriage, Miriam. I won't pretend I do. But I know Daniel hid trouble from everyone, including men who stood beside him with shovels. The fairness of that hurt and helped at once. So what do I do with the anger? She asked. Thomas looked at the trickle of water. Give it work. It will either soften or become useful. That became the closest thing Miriam had to a prayer that season. Then came the frost warning. It arrived in the old way, not by telegraph or official notice, but through Elena standing on Miriam's porch at dusk with her shawl wrapped tight and worry in the set of her mouth. The air had gone too still. The sunset was too clean. The blossoms on the west row had opened early after 3 warm days, and if frost settled before dawn, half the living promise could blacken before breakfast. Miriam wanted to rage at the unfairness of it. Instead, she gathered oil lamps, old sheets, burlap sacks, and every neighbor who had claimed recently to care about the orchard. People came. Not all. Enough. Thomas brought smudge pots from his own place. Elena brought her nephews. The blacksmith brought scrap iron pans. Mrs. Soria from the bakery arrived with coffee and announced that anyone who complained about cold would be assigned the far row. All night they moved between trees, covering the smallest grafts, tending smoke, keeping the air stirred just enough. Miriam walked until her feet went numb. Thomas found her near the bellflower graft after midnight, trying to tie a sheet with fingers too stiff to obey. "Let me," he said. "I can do it." "I know. Let me anyway." She let him. For a moment they stood shoulder to shoulder under the pale stars while smoke drifted low through the rows. "This is what keeping means," Miriam said. Thomas tied the knot. "Yes. Not papers, not meetings. Those too. But this. Mostly this." At dawn, frost silvered the grass beyond the orchard. The covered grafts survived. Some blossoms browned at the edges. Most held. Copper Hollow saw in the weak morning light what the orchard had required all along. Not belief spoken in town, but people willing to lose sleep for it. Miriam slept 4 hours that day and woke with smoke in her hair and a gratitude she did not yet know where to place. Spring did not arrive because the bank clerk had changed his tone. Water did not flow because Mercer had been exposed. The trees still needed pruning, mulching, graft sealing, root care, and patience so ordinary it looked like defeat to anyone passing by. Thomas came most mornings before his own work. At first, Miriam objected. Then she negotiated. He could help 3 mornings a week in exchange for cuttings when the first healthy growth allowed it. He insisted that was too much. She told him a poor bargain freely accepted was his own fault. They worked side by side as the weather shifted. Miriam learned Thomas had lost his wife 8 years earlier, long before Miriam returned west, and that grief had made him quieter but not bitter. He learned Miriam had spent more than a decade keeping accounts for a seed merchant after Daniel left, and that she knew exactly how men sounded when they called a woman practical, only after realizing she would not be moved by pity. Elena came twice a week and corrected both of them. The first green buds appeared on a pear tree near the stone trace. Miriam did not trust them at first. Hope had made a fool of many people. But the buds swelled, opened, and became leaves the color of new glass. Thomas found her standing beneath them one morning. "You've been here a while," he said. "I wanted to be sure they were still there." Leaves usually stay attached for more than an hour. "You have not known my luck." He looked up into the branches. "Daniel would have liked this." Miriam swallowed. "Yes." "Does that make it harder?" She considered lying. The old habit rose. A widow was expected to polish grief until it reflected well on everyone. "Sometimes," she said. "I loved him. I was angry with him. I still am. Those things do not cancel each other as neatly as people want." Thomas nodded. "No, they don't." She looked at him then. "You know that from your wife?" "I know it from living after her." The answer was so plain it did not invite curiosity. It invited respect. By summer, 5 of the 15 trees had taken new grafts. 3 more showed enough growth to wait. 4 were lost. Miriam mourned them in the practical way orchard people mourn, by cutting what could not be saved and using the wood for stakes. The first buyer came in September, not for fruit, for scion wood reserved for spring. Elena brought him, a grower from the valley south of Copper Hollow who spoke to trees more politely than he spoke to men. He examined the mother block, read Daniel's labels, tested the stored cuttings, and offered a contract that made the bank clerk smile without showing teeth. Miriam signed after reading every word. That evening she found Thomas repairing the old porch rail. "That rail was not in our agreement," she said. "It complained." "Wood does not complain. This wood did." She leaned beside him and watched the last light settle over the orchard. The rose still looked rough. Anyone expecting beauty would have been disappointed. But Miriam had stopped asking the orchard to look alive from the road. It was alive where it mattered. "I may be able to pay the next note," she said. "I heard. Copper Hollow hears everything." "Only after Ruth at the bakery does." Miriam smiled. "Mercer is leaving." "I heard that too." "Do you think he will return?" "Men like him often do, in some form." "Then we will keep better records." "We?" She regretted it instantly and did not regret it at all. Thomas set down the hammer. "Miriam?" "Yes?" "I do not want to become another man standing in Daniel's orchard as if I have a claim to it." The care in that sentence touched her more than any boldness could have. "You don't," she said. He nodded and looked away. She waited one breath, then added, "You may, however, stand in my orchard, if invited." He looked back. "Am I invited?" "For supper tonight." "That sounds manageable." "For pruning next March." "Also manageable." "For the years after, if you remain as patient as you pretend to be." Thomas's expression changed slowly. There was no boyish astonishment in it, no dramatic hunger, only relief, deep and careful, like water reaching a root that had not been sure the season would turn. "I can try," he said. "Trying is allowed. Assuming is not." "Understood." They ate supper on the porch because the house was too warm and the evening too good to waste indoors. Elena came by with bread and stayed because she had suspected supper might happen and wanted credit for not saying so. Thomas told a story about Daniel trying to graft plum onto a tree everyone told him would reject it. Miriam told a story about Daniel forgetting their anniversary but remembering the exact date a seed catalog arrived. The grief at the table did not vanish. It made room. By the next spring, the orchard bloomed unevenly. That was the word Miriam loved most. Unevenly. Not perfectly, not like a painting. One row opened early, another held back. Some branches were bare beside branches full of white flowers. Bees moved through the living parts without apology for the dead ones. People came from town to see. The bakery woman cried and denied it. The bank clerk called the recovery promising, as if the word cost him interest. The freight agent asked when shipments might begin. Miriam told him not to court fruit before blossom had become fruit, which made Elena laugh for a full minute. Thomas stood at the edge of the rows, watching Miriam more than the trees. She pretended not to notice until evening. When the visitors left, he found her near the 5th West Row pear, the one Daniel had mislabeled and Elena had corrected. "This tree confuses me," Miriam said. "It has company." "It is two things at once." "Many living things are." She touched a blossom. "I used to think I came here to settle Daniel's ending, sell the place, pay the debt, close the book. And now?" "Now the book keeps adding pages." Thomas removed his hat. "Would you object to my name appearing in a later chapter?" Miriam looked at him, then at the orchard, then at the house that no longer felt like Daniel's apology, but her own beginning. "That depends." she said. On what? Whether you understand this is not a dead orchard needing a man to save it. I do. And I am not a widow needing to be gathered up before I fall apart. I know. And if you call my pruning severe again, I may send you home before dessert. He smiled. Your pruning is severe. Thomas, but accurate. She shook her head and the laughter came before she could make it dignified. He took her hand only after she offered it. They stood there beneath the uneven blossoms, two people old enough to know that love did not erase what came before. It grafted carefully onto it, if the cut was clean and the root was sound. Years later, Copper Hollow no longer called it the Dead Orchard. People called it Vale Orchard, though the sign by the gate eventually read Vale and Calder Nursery because Thomas claimed his name was shorter and Miriam claimed the alphabet was not romance. In spring, wagons came for grafts. In autumn, pears wrapped in straw traveled farther than Daniel had ever managed to go. Elena's family grew 3 rows from the same old stock. Even the bank clerk bought 2 trees and asked Miriam where to plant them. She told him somewhere he could see from his window, so neglect would have to look him in the eye. The old sign remained in the barn, Dead Orchard for sale. Miriam never threw it away. On difficult days, when drought threatened or frost silvered the ground too late in April, she would look at it and remember how easily people named a thing finished when they wanted permission to take it. Then she would walk the rows with her knife, her ledger, and Thomas a few paces behind carrying twine. She would test the bark. She would look for green. And she would wait one more year when waiting was the truest work left to do.